Something occurred to me late last night at about midnight or 1 a.m., and that was that everything that we're seeing now with the media proclaiming Joe Biden to be the president, and Rudy Giuliani coming out and giving his press conference and saying, hey, this is our legal challenges. We've got all this evidence that we're going to try and challenge to get some of these ballots thrown out. We're going to win in all these states. And the reporters asked me, hey, but the election was just called. The race is over. You guys lost. And he said, well, who called the race? And they said, all the networks. All the networks. Everyone on TV says Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. So that means it's true. And of course, Giuliani mocked this and said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. If the networks say Joe Biden's president, then that's it. Of course he was being sarcastic. Because it's going to have to go through court, and that's true. But the media really does believe that they have the ability to select who the leaders of countries will be, because they did this. We've seen this movie before. I thought all this seems eerily similar, and then I realized last night this is just like what the U.S. mainstream media did in Venezuela, Fox News included. What happened in Venezuela was Maduro was running for re-election. The media said that Maduro was going to lose, but he was going to rig it. He was going to try and steal it. And then when Maduro won, which again, I don't really know if there was any impropriety in their election. It probably was. But would he have lost anyway? Probably not, from what I understand of the country. But nevertheless, the media decided to proclaim that no, Juan Guaido is the real president of Venezuela, not Nicolas Maduro. And so Juan Guaido went on American TV, and gave his speech about what he'd do in his first 100 days, and he was interviewed by the heads of all the networks, talking about what his plan was to get Venezuela back on track and put, and try and unify the country and, and try and heal all the damage that had been done by the evil bus driver, Nicolas Maduro. And so all the networks were unified. They said Juan Guaido is the president of Venezuela. Well, guess what? Here we are, a couple of years later. Who's the president of Venezuela? It's not Juan Guaido. Just because the media claims that somebody is the president of a certain country does not mean that it's true. This really is the Venezuela script down to a T, which makes me think that this is some kind of an intelligence op, because this seems like a common CIA tactic. Now, I don't know if they're involved, but it wouldn't shock me. The networks, of course, are in lockstep with the intelligence community, no matter who is president. That's one of the things that they hated about Trump the most, was that he questioned our intelligence community. Trump didn't trust the spooks. That was one of his greatest weaknesses. Well, now we see the media carrying out the exact same operation that they did, in Venezuela on behalf of the CIA to proclaim Juan Guaido president. And I'm seeing Americans buy into this, and I keep thinking, I was thinking all day yesterday, why is it that even people on the right are laying down and saying, well, I guess Biden's the president now? And they weren't saying that on Friday night. On Friday night, these were people who were saying, hey, let's see things through. Let's fight for our Orange Man. Who, by the way, I'm not a big fan of Orange Man. If he lost legitimately, I wouldn't really care. I'd move on with my life. But to me, it is a problem if you have people stealing an election. That becomes problematic, because if you have a really bad guy who tries to steal an election, then you're kind of screwed. So you need to call it out if somebody's trying to steal an election in this country. And I'm not saying that Joe Biden has done that yet. To me, what would be stealing the election would be just moving on and acting like there are no legal challenges, because there are problems in the court that will have to be settled. Not letting observers in to view the canvassing of ballots, that's a really big deal. You don't not do that in a fair election. The only reason why you don't let people get close enough so that they can be involved in the canvassing process is if you've got some monkey business going on. If you're trying to sneak in some ballots that should be thrown out. And so this will have to be adjudicated, and I don't know which way the courts will rule. But the media trying to set the narrative and acting like Joe Biden is the president, telling everyone Joe Biden is the president, and this is set in stone, is not only just factually untrue, but it is a form of a soft coup. This is one of the ways, again. Oh, actually, this just happened with Lukashenko. And lefties are posting pictures of Trump next to Lukashenko and saying, oh my gosh, they're exactly the same. I'm sorry, but the Western media can say that Lukashenko lost all they want. But, I mean, it's not like it was close in that case. I don't know. I'm sure that, that in Belarus, elections are not exactly free and fair. I'm 100% sure of that. But the media proclaiming that this woman, who officially got like 15% of the vote, is going to be the next president of Belarus does not make it so. In fact, based on what I saw, the level of support that this woman had in Belarus seemed to be limited to Minsk, to the urban, area. And so even if they had a free and fair election in Belarus, I don't think that Lukashenko would lose. The same is true probably with Putin. Now, the interesting thing is that in all of those cases, there were, in my view, legitimate cases to be made that Maduro, Lukashenko, Putin, all these people who the media, says are not the presidents of their country, there was a case that probably should have been made in court fairly. But it is absurd to argue that the other person is the president when they clearly are not. And it is hypocritical that in a U.S. election, when there is also, credible things that should be adjudicated, just like in Belarus, just like in Venezuela, just like in Russia, they take the opposite position. And they say, no. The guy who won this questionable election, he's definitely the president. And if you question that, that's basically treason. So they're running almost the same playbook, but they're just swapping jerseys. And so it really is pathetic to see people fooled by this. I mean, this is the problem with Americans not following foreign policy. I am kind of impregnated against this because I follow American foreign policy and watch the American media proclaim people who in no way are going to become the leaders of their countries, the leaders of their country. And so when they came out and said, Joe Biden's going to be the next president of the United States, that carried absolutely zero water with me. I had the exact same reaction that Rudy Giuliani did. Oh, all the networks. Ha! It's absurd. And you would think that some of these members of the media who are doing this would look at their own track record, proclaiming Al Gore to be the next president of the United States, proclaiming Juan Guaido to be the next president of Venezuela, proclaiming that whoever that woman was to be the next president of Belarus. You'd think that there would be maybe a bit of hesitation on their part to continually say, yep, this person is definitely going to win. And so once you realize that, it starts to look much more likely that Donald Trump actually will hold on and win re-election, which, for strategic reasons, is not necessarily the best thing in the world to me. The only reason why I, at the end, decided that it'd be better if Trump won is because it'll create chaos. I think that there are a lot of downsides to Trump being elected, which I've talked about it over the last couple of years over the course of the channel. But basically, there's going to be a very, very bad recession at some point, and preferably, I want a Democrat to be in office when that happens. And the reason for that is because they will blame it on whatever the abstract, philosophy of the president happens to be, even though that will have nothing to do with why we're in a recession. But basically, if a Republican is president when there's a recession, it's because of uninhibited laissez-faire capitalism and free markets running rampant, which is absurd. And when a Democrat is president, what will happen if there's a recession is people will blame it on socialism, which also would be kind of absurd, because we don't really have either of those things. I mean, economically speaking, the United States is a corporatist or a fascist country. We are neither capitalist nor communist. But anyway, if you set that whole economic issue aside, I would prefer to see Trump win because it makes people's heads explode, and because he is not, he's not totally in line with the establishment. He's far more establishment-y and friendly with them than I would want a president to be. But he's better than the alternative. And if Trump wins in this way through the courts, after the media has convinced a majority of the country, okay, a good chunk of Trump supporters now believe Joe Biden's going to be the next president of the United States. They've given up hope. They're doomers, okay, which is, the natural tendency of the right anyway. I mean, that's you can't be psychologically, you can't be conservative unless you think that America's going down the tubes at all times. But that's a discussion for another day. So if Trump does make a comeback win and win in the courts, I mean, there's no coming back from that for America. Trump will never be a legitimate president. The media has convinced everyone that Trump is not going to be the president. And if Trump ends up staying in the White House, he will be considered even more of a dictator than he already is. I mean, people say, oh, yeah, Trump's a dictator. But, I mean, they know in the back of their mind that, I mean, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. They'll shout that at rallies, but they know it's not true. If Trump does come back and win in the courts, and the media says that Trump lost the election, there will be, I think, open rebellion in the streets, which is good, because I think the left are the only people who are going to be able to do that. I do not trust the right to rebel against the government. I think that our federal government is, completely beyond reform, and that it has to be torn down by somebody. And I don't trust right-wingers to do that. If the left comes in and oversteps their power, unless they go all hard at once and say, we're going to confiscate everyone's guns, the right's not going to do anything about it. And by the way, that fail-safe of knowing that people will rebel if the left tries to literally take away everyone's guns, that's why I've never gotten too scared about an election. I never think that, oh my gosh, this is over, because that is the last domino to fall, and it is a fail-safe. But I don't want us to have to get that far. If we get to the point to where the left is trying to round up guns, we're going to be in a very bad spot. It'll be much better if the left just throws a temper tantrum and says, we're never going to recognize President Trump, and secedes, and the country splits apart and splinters into 50 independent countries, or maybe 5 or 6 regional federations, then things would be much better off in this country. And by the way, that is what the Democrats said they had planned. Through the Transition Integrity Council, John Podesta in his war game said if he playing Joe Biden, if he lost, he would go to California, proclaim himself the president of Cascadia, and California, Oregon, and Washington would secede. And so when I saw that, I saw, wow, the Democrats want to secede if Trump wins re-election? Well, let's push and try and get Trump re-elected. Well, that was if he won fairly, through the electoral process with no gray area here like a court battle. If Trump wins through the courts, there is no question that this country will be on the brink of collapse, politically speaking. I don't want our society to be destroyed. That is the last thing I want. Our government is destroying our society, and that's why we have to come up with a new, more equitable regime. And by equitable, I mean not this regime where people on the left and right constantly feel like they're being oppressed by the other side. You can't have that. We need more localized governments that reflect the interests of their population, so that you don't have these solid red counties or these solid blue counties who feel like they're living under an occupation. And I think that the left will pick up their toys and go home if Trump becomes the president of the United States for another 4 years. So I'm definitely rooting for Trump in court. I mean, Trump winning on Election Day would have been satisfying and would have created a lot of chaos, and the left would have wanted to leave this country. They would have given up on democracy, I think, national democracy, which would have been excellent, because this idea that we're going to just settle our differences through a national, or through a presidential election every 4 years is a terrible, terrible idea. I think the left would have given up on that. But if they think that they've won, and then Trump comes back and snatches victory from the jaws of defeat, the freakout will be 10 times worse on their part. They will be so much more demoralized. They will believe and of course, I guess the first thing they'll do is try and abolish the Electoral College. But I definitely don't think that Republicans will ever give in on that. Not at this point. Not since it is the only thing helping them hang on. And of course, you'd have to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. Totally impossible in today's environment. You couldn't amend the Constitution to make Veterans Day a national holiday, let alone completely eviscerate our electoral process as it has been known since the founding of the United States. I mean, if you don't have the Electoral College, there is no United States. The United States would have never existed for as long as it has if it weren't for the Electoral College, because if states feel like they have no say, then they will leave. And hopefully, the left-wing states will leave. So don't be dumb and just have faith in Trump. That's stupid. What you should do is examine reality, look at what's happening, and realize that what the media is telling you is not entirely correct, and that this election is not over yet. Now, again, Trump has a good chance of losing in the courts, too. And if he does, then at that point, accept, okay, it's over. But don't accept that this whole race is over just because John King or Steve Kornacki says that it's over. Trump is he's still alive in Arizona, by the way. He might win Arizona outright, and I think that Georgia will be the easiest state for him to flip with a court challenge. With that said, at that point, if he's able to secure Arizona and Georgia, he only needs one more state. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.